So I don't know if you find it stunning that we're already at this place on the church calendar, but I really do. Here we are, the Feast of Transfiguration already. And Lent will begin this week on Wednesday, which is Ash Wednesday, a day we acknowledge our mortality, our deep need because of our brokenness and sin. But first, we celebrate the Transfiguration, that mysterious, glorious moment in time and space where earthly and heavenly time and space just kind of collapse together to reveal Jesus' full identity, Jesus in his divine glory. I admit that I have not always understood the Transfiguration as a major event in the life of Christ, and I'm not alone in that. The Western Church as a whole has not always emphasized it like our brothers and sisters from the Eastern Church, who recognize it as a watershed moment in the life of Christ, with the Galilean ministry of Christ before and the way of the cross after to Jerusalem and the cross before him. Many have interpreted it to be this soul-strengthening event for Christ, to help him keep in mind the glory that would be his after the cross, the resurrection glory. But that seems unsatisfactory on several planes of thought for me. Could Jesus forget who he was? I don't know. Looking together at the passage in Mark's somewhat abbreviated version of the Transfiguration, we notice this. It starts with these three words, 6 days later. It is not usual for Mark to be so precise, so it draws our attention. What happened 6 days before? And as it happens, a lot happened. 4,000 plus people were miraculously fed. The religious establishment was challenged by Jesus. He restored sight to a blind man. He asked the disciples who people and who they thought that he was. And he heard Peter's confession as spokesperson for them all that Jesus was the Messiah. And he taught the crowds and particularly told the disciples that suffering and death were ahead for him. When Peter refuses to accept that message and corrects Jesus, Jesus rebukes Peter in these harsh words. Get behind me, Satan, for you have your own concerns in mind and not the concerns of God. So 6 days later, that's where our narrative starts. 6 days later, Jesus took Peter and James and John with him and led them up to a high mountain apart from the others. And he was transfigured before them, his clothes dazzling white, whiter than any bleach could dye them. And there appeared with him Moses and Elijah talking with him. And the 3 disciples saw this glorious yet terrifying scene. Now James and John were afraid, and they seem to be so afraid that they can't even speak. But Peter, nope. It says he didn't know what to say, but he speaks anyway. I imagine Peter, who is that person in almost any group of people that gather who's uncomfortable with the slightest pause or silence in the conversation and rush in with anything or something to fill that space. So he does. Let's build 3 shelters here. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. It's good for us to be here. And unspoken, let's stay in this moment. Then a cloud overshadows them all, and a voice comes out from the cloud. This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him. The message was for the disciples. Listen to him. And Moses, who delivered God's law to the people, and Elijah, a major prophet to the people, disappeared just as suddenly as they had appeared. And Jesus looks like the Jesus they knew from day-to-day life all of a sudden, and no more cloud. What could it all mean? I imagine they think they'll discuss it with the others and get their take on it when they get down from the mountain. But as they're coming down from the mountain, Jesus ordered a strong word, not to tell anyone until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. And what could that mean? This is just mystery upon mystery upon mystery. These poor guys had no context to make sense of what they had seen or what rising from the dead meant. Was it a metaphor, perhaps, they thought? And again, Jesus has spoken of dying. It just doesn't add up to them. But that voice said, listen to Jesus. Listen. We're trying, I bet they're thinking, but what does it mean? Can you imagine how hard it was to come off the mountain and back into the fray of life and everyday life and ministry? Maybe some of you have seen the work of art by Raphael, which is actually Raphael's last painting, The Transfiguration of Christ. And in that painting, there are 3 layers, if you will. There's the mountain scene with Jesus aglow with an inner light shining forth. And Elijah and Moses are hovering, one on each side, as if seeing the fulfillment of everything good given in God's law for our flourishing, and every promise of the prophets. And they see that amazingly embodied in Christ. And so they're hovering on both sides, almost with a wonder on their faces and awe. There's wonder and there's worship as they look at Christ. And just below that scene, there are the 3 scared, stiff disciples sprawled out on the ground, shielding their eyes, afraid to look, and yet being drawn to look because it is so wondrously attractive. And then, the part that speaks to me the most is below this glorious scene, there is a day in the life of difficult ministry. There is a crowd and chaos as a father brings his son with a demonic spirit that often attempts to harm him. And the desperate father brings his son for help, looking for Jesus probably, but Jesus isn't there at that moment. And so at first, the 9 disciples who are not up on the mountain are hovering around talking and trying to do some intervention in the life of this young boy, trying everything they know how to do, but they're unsuccessful in saving the boy. 3 disciples see a glory that they cannot comprehend, and they won't comprehend that for some time. Much must transpire before they even begin to register that Jesus truly is the Son of God and what that means for them. And 9 disciples below are in the midst of a broken, evil world. They're seeing a bondage of a person that they can't comprehend either, evil that will not budge to their best efforts to exorcise or heal, evil that seems futile to try to intervene in. But thankfully, Jesus and the other 3 arrived down from the mountain, and Jesus has the power and the authority to break the bonds of evil that hold that young boy. So both the 3 and the 9 were given the gift of seeing who Jesus really was on that day. Each of them, each group, saw an experience of the kingdom as a gift. The 3 saw Jesus' unveiled presence and majesty. The 9 saw the relief of Jesus showing up just when they needed him to heal what was beyond their faith or power to do. The 3 were charged to hold the secret of this incredible vision. I wonder if they were just dying to tell, to process it with the others, because it was something that certainly would have needed processing in their minds. And the 9, theirs was an unspoken charge to look beyond what sight perceives and find who Jesus truly is in their own circumstance and setting. So I see myself more in the chaos than the mountain. Yet the transfiguration is for us too. The transfiguration is the church's hope. 1 John 3:2 says, when Christ appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is, just as those 3 disciples saw him as he truly is when the veil was pulled back. 1 Peter 2:9 says, God called us out of darkness into his marvelous light. Charles Wesley, in one of his nativity hymns, writes this, and it shows that he had a picture that light in Christ was shared with us. He deigns in flesh to appear, widest extremes to join, to bring our vileness near and make us all divine. And we, the life of God, shall know, for God is manifest below, sharing his divine nature with us, sharing the light from inside Christ with us. It's amazing, amazing grace. But who can blame Peter for wanting a shortcut to that moment when evil would not be here and divine light would shine from us as Christ gives us that? Shortcuts are a popular scriptural story. We see in the temptation of Christ at the beginning of his ministry that the devil gave him options for shortcuts: glory, authority, power, without sacrifice, without the way of the cross. Take a shortcut to those things that would be yours through a harder road. So we're all a little bit like Peter. We prefer comfort and worldly happiness to a cross of suffering. Who of us would not prefer to take detours around rather than going through things like the worry of waiting for medical tests, the weariness of grief and what it does to our souls, the chemo or radiation or both for the cure of cancer, the marriage counseling to attempt to put life back together again, the unemployment line, the 12-step meetings, the pain of addressing experienced trauma, an isolating pandemic. Who of us would not want a shortcut? Let's build a shelter here and stay in this moment. But there is no shortcut. Not for Jesus, and not for his disciples then, and not for us now. We have to learn to listen to the Son by his word and example, even when those things around us either blind us by their glory or more often discourage us by their evil. God's voice and message are found in the suffering and daily grind of life, as well as those brief, fleeting glimpses of glory. And it's odd to me that the voice from the cloud, the voice of God the Father, said, listen, with all of this visual there. It would be easier to have him say, look at this. But he says, listen, and don't be distracted by what you see. We're asked to not let what we see prevent us from hearing the voice of Jesus. Whether like the 3 we see indescribable glory, or like the 9, we're living in difficulties that seem impossible to overcome, and we wonder where God is. Whatever each day brings, we're called to listen. And we're entering the season of Lent where we're intentional about slowing down, about maybe getting away from social media, maybe getting away from the TV, maybe making space and time in our lives to listen in a way that we often don't take time to do. So as we enter this season of Lent, let's listen well. Let's encourage one another to listen. Let's listen to the beloved Son and not let the day-to-day circumstances of our life blind us to what we hear from God. May it be so.